Welcome back as we wrap up our conversation about Father Abraham. As always, we're going to be asking the question, what does the story reveal about the nature of Yahweh's interaction with people? And we are going to be using the Lexham English Bible. As usual, there's a link in the description below if you want to follow along. Happy 100th birthday, Abraham. The, we are in the big whirlwind year of Abraham's life. He's going to turn 100. He receives the covenant sign of circumcision. Yahweh judges the cities of the plain in dramatic fashion. Sarah's abducted again. And finally, Isaac, the promised one, will be born to Sarah, who is 90. Just a crazy year. There are some years of my life I thought were pretty chaotic. They have nothing on this. So we talked in the past, over the last few weeks, how the test one, leave country, clan, family, the abduction of Sarai in Egypt by Pharaoh, how he threw them out of the country, the separation from Lot, the covenant, and how he said, you haven't given me an heir, so I have assigned firstborn to my servant. Yahweh said, nope, not a firstborn, not a surrogate. It will be your child. We looked at Ishmael's birth. He finally has his son. But Yahweh's going to say, nope, he's not the right one. That was your effort, but I still have one coming. The promised child's not here. There's the covenant sign of circumcision and new names given to them. And then the dramatic destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah and the other cities of the plain. And this is where we're going to pick up our story. Now, I want to think about this for a minute. So remember, this all takes place in 1 year. And the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah wasn't a little thing in a corner. These were big, prosperous cities. There was a lot going on. And when this happens, Genesis tells us that Abraham, standing way away, looks out towards the plains and he can see the smoke and the destruction coming up. It was devastating to everyone. It was a massive, just tragedy. I mean, it was judgment, yes, but it was also lives lost, economy lost, whole region destroyed and demolished. Makes me think of what happens when Israel exited the wilderness after 40 years. So 440, 50 years later, they come out of the wilderness, this massive people, and the two spies go into the land and they are protected by Rahab in Jericho. And what does she say? Before they went to sleep, she came up to them on the roof and said to the men, I know that Yahweh has given you the land, and that dread of you has fallen on us, and that all the inhabitants of the land melt away in fear because of your presence. For we have heard how Yahweh dried up the waters of the Red Sea before you when you went out from Egypt, and what you did to the two kings of the Amorites that were beyond the Jordan, Sihon and Og, whom you utterly destroyed. We heard this, and our hearts melted, and no courage was left in anyone because of your presence. For Yahweh your God is God in the heavens above and on earth below. All of this destruction that he did in Egypt, and then their warfare with these big, powerful nations, where they destroyed them utterly at God's command. All of this frightened the world around them. Everyone knew and was terrified of what was coming. That brings us to we looked at these things, the second abduction of Sarah by Abimelech. Now, after this massive destruction, these cities, this prosperous place was destroyed in such dramatic fashion, Abraham doesn't want to live next to it anymore, doesn't want to sit there in the shadows of these ruins. So he moves on and comes into the land of Gerar. And so keep this in mind that this is days after the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. Abraham journeyed from there to the land of the Negev, and he settled between Kadesh and Shur, and he dwelt as an alien in Gerar. And Abraham said to Sarah's wife, about Sarah's wife, "She's my sister." And Abimelech, king of Gerar, sent and took Sarah. And God came to Abimelech in a dream at night, and he said to him, "Look, you are a dead man on account of the woman you have taken, for she is married." Now Abimelech had not approached her, so he said, "My lord, will you even kill a righteous people? Did he not say to me, 'She is my sister'?" She herself said, "He is my brother. With integrity of my heart and with cleanness of my hands I did this." Then God said to him in a dream, "Yes, I know that in the integrity of your heart you did this, and I also kept you from sinning against me. Therefore, I did not allow you to touch her. So now return the wife of the man, for he is a prophet, so that he will pray for you and you will live. And if you do not return her, know that you will certainly die, all that are yours." Abraham flees the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. He continues this to lie about his relationship with Sarah. Uh, some speak harshly about Abraham for this. You know, on the one hand, Abraham has seen Yahweh intercede and prevent Sarah from marrying Pharaoh. Yahweh had just stated that she was going to be the mother of his son, the promised one. So this would appear to be a breach in Abraham's trust if he knew this was going to happen in the next year. Certainly, he should have owned up the relationship. Some commentators have suggested that, well, he figured God would just deal with it. This was a sign of his trust. Don't think so. I think he should be criticized, but I want to make an observation about it. Um, I would say that yes, we would say he's wrong, but we should not throw stones. We should never throw stones, but sometimes you look at somebody and you're just like, "You're really wrong." At other times, you know, I just know that the Lord has worked in my heart about things. And I look at things that I have done and behavior patterns in my life, and I thought, why did you not deal with this 25 years ago? Why did you allow this to exist and be a problem for so long? Why did you not show me? And it is distinctly possible that this is just for Abraham and Sarah. This is just a problem in how they view themselves, they view God, how they have a pattern of behavior that is really hard to change. God doesn't rebuke every sin in our lives immediately. With each person, He works in a unique manner, and we should be patient with each other and those we read about in the Bible who struggle with their sin. Yahweh, He appears to Abimelech in a dream. He has this conversation with him. You ever, you ever really thought about this? I mean, Yahweh, the creator of the universe, is talking with this king. Just this guy. And it's implied that Abimelech has respect for Yahweh throughout the entire story. It's unclear. Um, if this was just terror over the Sodom and Gomorrah incident and the God who would do that, or if it's because he truly had respect like Melchizedek. We don't know. But here he's sleeping, and in his dreams, things come on, and this figure walks up to him in his dreams, and it's just like, "Hi, I'm the God of the universe, and you are a dead man." You talk about terror? How just utterly, mind-numbingly scared he must be. It's like, you stole a woman that I was protecting. You, you know, he's scared. Rightly, Abimelech doesn't copy Adam and Eve. He doesn't say, but Abraham. His first words are, "My Lord, will you even kill a righteous people?" Clearly, he's thinking of Sodom and Gomorrah. And his first thought is for the people under his care. Will you destroy all of my people like you just did in Sodom and Gomorrah? We're righteous. Remember? Righteous. They were unrighteous. We're righteous. Will you kill them? And Yahweh acknowledges this sin was committed in ignorance. It's still sin, but it was in ignorance. And so Yahweh protected him. And this bothers me. We'll come back to this question, right? Why does Abraham have to pray for Abimelech? You know, because, sorry, this doesn't make sense intuitively from a normal human standpoint. But we'll come back for a minute. So Abimelech rose early in the morning, and he called all of his servants, and he told them all these things. And the men were very afraid. Again, remember, it's only been days, maybe weeks, couple of weeks since the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah and the rest of the cities, just, a couple of days away from them as you walk, right? It's possible that they could see, they experienced the smoke and they could see this stuff. And Abimelech called for Abraham. So Abraham comes and he says to him, "What have you done to us? And how have I sinned against you that you brought upon me and upon my kingdom a great sin? You have done things to me that should not be done." And Abimelech said to Abraham, "What were you thinking?" Literally, what did you see that you did this thing? You know, and Abraham said, "Because I thought, surely there's no fear of God in this place. They'll kill me on account of the matter of my wife. Besides, she is my sister and the daughter of my father, but not the daughter of my mother, and she became my wife. And it happened that as God caused me to wander from the house of my father, I said to her, 'This is your loyal kindness that you must do for me at every place where we come. Say concerning me, he is my brother.'" Uh, these people are terrified. They keep looking over their shoulders in the direction of the cities of the plain and worrying what Yahweh thinks. And so Abimelech summons Abraham and he rebukes him. Rightly, I might add. Uh, so while Abimelech gave a good defense to Yahweh, protect my people. You do understand that I was innocent in this. I thought I was behaving righteously. Abraham, he's got the weakest defense. Well, I kind of figured nobody here probably trusted in God and that they weren't going to follow any of his commands, and so they would just kill me. I assumed, and technically, It's only kind of a little lie because she really is my sister. I just deceived you in thinking that she wasn't also my wife. Does this remind you of anyone? Adam? Eve? God, it's your fault? And like this, and when God caused me to wander from my house. Uh, okay. Like, I'm pretty sure you could have said no, but you saw the promise and you thought, yep, gonna go do this. But, let's blame God. Unreal. Come on, Abraham, this is not one of your better moments. And Abimelech took sheep and cattle and male slaves and female slaves, and he gave them to Abraham. And he returned Sarah his wife to him. And Abimelech said, here is my land before you. Settle where it pleases you. And to Sarah he said, look, I have given 1,000 pieces of silver to your brother. It shall be an exoneration. You are vindicated before all who are with you. The wording is almost like you have a veil, a covering before all who are with you. And Abraham prayed to God, and God healed Abimelech and his wife and his female servants so that they could bear children again. For Yahweh had completely closed up the wounds of the house of Abimelech because of the matter of Sarah, the wife of Abraham. Honorable Abimelech offers gifts to scoundrel Abraham and asks Abraham to pray for him. Uh, 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 you, uh, these gifts aren't required, and clearly Abraham, despite acting like a scoundrel, is important to Yahweh. Therefore, Abimelech is giving these gifts, these offerings, kind of like when Saul goes to Samuel and he offers some money. Um, uh, there's this concept of going to a prophet and asking for help and offering food or resources or things as a payment. Um, Probably more in the same way you would pay a pastor, so that his focus is on the ministry and not having to go feed his family. He also gives this massive sum, right? To make sure everyone knows he's serious when he says, I didn't touch Sarah. But why does Abraham have to pray for Abimelech? Commentaries don't speak too much into this point, other than to say it had to do with Abraham's place as a prophet. Remember, before the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, Yahweh says, shall I conceal from Abraham what I'm going to do? So he has this counsel. Should I include him in my counsel? Abraham will surely become a great and strong nation, and all the nations of the earth will be blessed on account of him. For I have chosen him, and that he will command his children and his household after him, that they will keep the way of Yahweh, to do righteousness and justice, so that Yahweh may bring upon Abraham that which he said to him. So I think the answer is, why would scoundrel Abraham have to pray for righteous acting Abimelech? It's not because Abraham was good and Abimelech was bad. It's because God chose Abraham to be a prophet. He was the chosen one who would have the promised seed. And in that role, Abimelech is to go and pray for forgiveness for his actions. His actions were wrong, even if done innocently. So Abraham's worthiness was not in himself, but in the one who chose him and placed him in a role. And God has now rescued Sarah back, and it is time, finally, for the promised one to be born. 3 months of complete craziness, the destruction of all of these people and cities, and the abduction of Sarah, and now God has visited her. It's the boy. And Yahweh visited Sarah as he had said, and Yahweh did to Sarah as he had promised. And she conceived, and Sarah bore to Abraham a son in his old age, at the appointed time that God had told him. Abraham called the name of his son who was born to him, whom Sarah bore to him, Isaac. And Abraham circumcised Isaac his son when he was 8 days old, as God had commanded him. And Abraham was 100 years old when Isaac his son was born to him. And Sarah said, God has made laughter for me. All who hear me will laugh. And she said, who would announce to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? Yet I have borne a son to Abraham in his old age. Yahweh visited Sarah as he said. Yahweh did to Sarah as he promised. Sarah bore a son at the time God appointed. Abraham called him Isaac as God instructed. Abraham circumcised Isaac as God had commanded. This story wraps up around a faithful God who so amazingly shepherded things. See this promise? God, this pattern God is fulfilling and they are obeying. He called Abraham, he guided and directed him. He protected him time and time again. He protected Sarah. He gently shepherded them past the point of natural childbearing. He made it clear for all time that this son wasn't the result of genetics or lucky happenstance. The child was born through a miracle because he was the child of promise. For 25 years, Abraham would live as a nomad, waiting for Yahweh to fill his promises, and his faith was rewarded. Even at times when it was hard to see his faith in Genesis, even when we struggle and you have to look really close, Hebrews reminds us that Isaac's birth was a result of faith. They believed and Yahweh acted. All these years, the promises were never in doubt. You know why? Because Yahweh actively interacted with mankind to ensure his word would not fail. These promises were not now or ever dependent upon man. They were always dependent upon the creator of the cosmos, who promised and would work out his will on earth. That's a faithful God. The God of the universe is interactive with his creation. He preserves, he protects, and works out his will. Do you trust him? Sometimes it's hard. Just like when Yahweh is silent for 5 to 10 years with Abraham and Sarah, they didn't always maintain pristine faith. They weren't this amazing couple that just always did exactly right. But they kept returning to the one who would keep his promises, the one who could always ensure his promises would succeed. But in passing, Isaac had competition. All the commentators go on about this. There was Lot, who probably functioned as the firstborn. Then Eleazar, the surrogate firstborn, given the title given after Lot leaves. He was not a blood relation. Then there's Ishmael. That's not it. After Sarah dies, we sometimes forget that Abraham remarries and he has 5 sons through Keturah. Um, all of these are at some level competition for the promised one slot to be the one, and that can't be endured. And so they're all sent away. Lot for some for good reasons, some for bad reasons, like Ishmael being sent away because Hagar and Sarah never get along, and Ishmael makes fun of Isaac, and so Sarah just demands their departure, their banishment. And Abimelech, after these things, is going to come and his response is so much different than Pharaoh, who's angry and thrust them out and embarrassed. Abimelech, he builds a covenant. They have a relationship as friends, as peers. It's good. And now we come to the final exam. If you recall, a few weeks ago, we raised a question about why Abraham would follow Yahweh. He was an idolater. Yahweh dangles a carrot in front of him: progeny, property, possessions, health, wealth, and happiness. Not quite. I jest. But he would get a land. He would have innumerable progeny, children everywhere. And he would have possessions, great wealth. It took 25 years, but Yahweh finally, finally fulfills his promises. Abraham had the wealth and the promised heir. The property would come later, centuries later, but that was probably okay. He's living in this land of Gerar. He has this region to live out a comfortable life. I suspect the property mattered not as much at the moment to him. Now, Isaac is 16, asking for keys to the camel, getting the whole no friends on the camel lecture. Now, Yahweh asks Abraham to sacrifice Isaac. Not just give him up as Hannah does with Samuel to the temple. Actually take a knife, cut his throat, and then set him on fire. Actually kill the promised child. And it happened after these things. God tested Abraham, and he said to him, Abraham, and he said, Here I am. So take your son, your only child, Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains I will tell you. Once we had a son, after 12 years of waiting, I had a hard time trusting Yahweh for his safety. I wanted a baby monitor so that I could be alert, be aware. We never got one because Melissa wouldn't live that way, which is good. It's good for me. It was really hard. It forced me to confront my lack of faith in Yahweh on a daily basis. I'd remember when he'd sleep in and I'd start to worry about SIDS or something else having gone wrong. I would fret about it. He's just sleeping in. But It was hard. It was really hard. Prayed for so long, wanted so much for a child, and then the worry that something might happen. I remember when somebody I know lost a child in a tragic accident. They had a couple of kids, right? Even as I felt sorrow for their loss, some wicked part of my brain would say, at least they have other children. In another case, at least they are young enough to have more. I know they're horrible thoughts. Some part of my brain was thinking at least it wasn't us. I wasn't trying to minimize their loss. I was thinking about our situation and the fact that it had taken so long for us to have a child. I couldn't envision us ever having it. There would be no more, right? To be clear, those thoughts were selfish, unkind, and transparently, they just lacked trust in Yahweh. His plan is always good, even if it means the loss of your only child. He's still good. We should, like Job, say, though he slay me, yet will I trust him. I can only imagine the horror Abraham felt at this command from Yahweh. He looks down the corridor of this path that God has laid out for him. How long did it take for him to say, to obey? Did he tell Sarah? I seriously doubt it. Hebrews says he believed God would bring Isaac back to life. But let's be fair, even if he thought that, I mean, he did, but even in thinking that, he still had to murder his son. I mean, it's like, seriously. I would have taken a long time to agree to this. And honestly, I'm not sure I would do it. Even having read Genesis, even knowing the end of the story, even knowing the end of all stories in heaven someday, I I'm not sure I trust Yahweh enough to follow in Abraham's footsteps. The fact that he took the first step and he went on this walk to Moriah says so much about him and his faith in the God of the universe who keeps his promises. And this is the thing, he may have left Ur for those promises, but now he has abandoned them. The only thing that matters is obeying God. If obeying God means he has to give up the promise of a child, all of this progeny, all of this stuff is gone because the promised one is gone, so be it. Obedience to Yahweh mattered more. What are you willing to sacrifice for Yahweh? Anything? Everything? What are you holding back? Don't answer flippantly. And don't ask the question until you're ready to let it go. Yahweh may take it, he may not. He knows what's best. But I'll say this, These are deep waters to walk in. Be prepared when you go down this path and you give everything to him. Abraham rose up early in the morning and he saddled his donkey and he took two of his servants with him and Isaac his son. And he chopped wood for a burnt offering and he got up and went to the place where God had told him. And on the third day, Abraham lifted up his eyes and he saw the place at the distance. Abraham said to his servants, "You stay here with the donkey. I and the boy will go up there. We will worship and then we will return to you." We will return, he says. Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and placed it on Isaac his son. And he took the fire in his hand and the knife, and the two of them went together. And Isaac said to Abraham his father, "My father." He said, "Here I am, my son." He says, "Here's the fire and the wood, but where's the lamb for the burnt offering?" And Abraham says, "God will provide the lamb for a burnt offering, my son." And the two of them went together. Look at this faith. Everything is ready. Fire, the wood, the supplies, the assistance. They go north for 3 days till Yahweh points out the selected mountain. Even as he walks, footstep after heavy footstep, Yahweh is guiding them. Abraham leaves the servants behind because surely they would have stopped him. Like, who wouldn't, right? I am suspicious that Abraham was quieter than normal. Everything would be suppressed. And Isaac finally asked the burning question: "Where's the lamb?" And Abraham reveals his faith. God will provide a lamb. Abraham, or Hebrews reveals to us that he expected one of two things: that Yahweh would supply a substitute, or Yahweh would raise his son from the dead. He knew he would be returning with Isaac. How that was going to work out, he didn't know. And yet, Isaac, if it's sacrifice and resurrection, Isaac was going to suffer brutally. But the answer is such faith. He knew that he might have to cut his son's throat, set him on fire, but Yahweh would return him and they would walk off that mountain together. I can't imagine this response. I cannot envision this walk that they took up that mountain. It violates every good thing. It violates the natural, Yahweh ordained order of the universe. Yahweh was asking Abraham to violate everything good and right in the world. And let's be clear, Yahweh is not the author of sin. Yahweh would never let him go through with this. It would violate his own personal self. And Yahweh will never do that. Abraham may or may not have fully seen and understood that. He didn't have a Bible. He didn't have examples. They came to the place that God had told them, and Abraham built an altar there and arranged the wood. He bound Isaac his son and placed him on the altar atop the wood. And Abraham stretched out his knife and took the knife to slaughter his son. I, Isaac trusted his father. No reproach, no rebellion. Isaac knew he was a child of promise. He knew he was unusual, and yet he wasn't so full of himself uh, that he couldn't submit. In humility, the promised one went to the altar. He obeyed his father, knowing that his father loved him. I can't imagine what it would be like to read this story for the first time as an adult, not knowing how it was going to end. And you get to this point and you're just ready for Abraham to murder the promised child, and you're, what in the world? All this effort over 35 years, he's throwing it all away. And Isaac refusing. Self-preservation. I mean, even the pagans agree that self-preservation, the preserving of your life was a gift from the gods, and you have a responsibility to preserve it. Everyone agrees. And so what's Isaac doing? He's placing his life in the hands of the Father. He's trusting that his Father knows best. He's willing to lay down his life, if that's the requirement, to obey his Father. Yahweh speaks from heaven. Stop. Surely Abraham and Isaac just melt. The relief. You've passed your final exam, Abraham. You trusted me beyond any reasonable expectation. Yahweh was more important than the promise. Yahweh was truly all to Abraham. And the angel of Yahweh called to him from heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. He said, here I am. Do not stretch your hand out against the boy. Do not do anything to him. For now I know that you are one who fears God, since you have not withheld your son, your only child, from me. And Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, a ram was caught in the thicket by its thorns. Abraham went, took the ram, and he offered it as a burnt offering in place of his son. Abraham called the name of that place, Yahweh will provide. For which reason is said today, on the mountain of Yahweh it shall be provided. Yahweh has supplied the sacrifice. And the angel of Yahweh called to Abraham a second time from heaven. He said, I swear by myself, declares Yahweh, that because you have done this thing and have not withheld your son, your only child, that I will certainly bless you and greatly multiply your offspring as the stars of heaven and as the sand that is by the shore of the sea. And your offspring will take possession of the gate of their enemies. And all the nations of the earth will be blessed through your offspring, because you have listened to my voice. The promise is repeated this time with Isaac present. Progeny, property, possessions. Abraham was willing to give it all up to follow Yahweh. All these years of following that promise, now he set it aside and Yahweh gave it back. I'm willing to bet that Abraham and Isaac sat on that mountain for a long time. Emotionally spent, father and son, just sitting, talking, processing. What an amazing story. What a picture of a father willing to sacrifice his son, of a son willing to be sacrificed by his father. A picture of the serpent slayer who would willingly be sacrificed for us. Here's the thing. I think that sometimes we think Christ's death was easy. Of course he didn't want the pain of the cross, but it wouldn't last that long. Then everything would be fine. He'd be in heaven. The pain would all be over. It's not like that. Just as we think about the horror Abraham faced walking up that mountain, tying his son to the altar, and how hard it would have been for Abraham to slaughter the promised son. This doesn't even begin to scratch the surface of Yahweh's agony at sacrificing his own son. The difficulty of the cross was not physical suffering. The difficulty was their love and relationship. Christ would receive the sin of the world and be separated from the Father and the Spirit. For the first time, the Trinity would be rent in twain. The Father would punish all of his anger upon his Son, who did nothing wrong, who went as a lamb to the slaughter. Like we see Isaac, without fussing, without fighting, he submitted. This ripping, this punishing, that is the pain of the cross. That's the suffering Christ desired to avoid. Abraham's history leads us to this point. Yahweh didn't casually sacrifice his son on the cross. It was agony. It was unimaginable suffering. It was indescribable pain. Because he had an indescribable love for us. Abraham followed Yahweh even when it made no sense. Yahweh made promises, and he shepherded those promises, the affairs of men to accomplish those promises. We cannot put our faith in the God of the universe, who is actively intervening in the affairs of men to ensure that his promises, that all things would work out well for those who are called by his name.